Hello everyone and welcome to this WFA chat session, which is a coffee break discussion. I'm Molly Theocaras, Head of Content for WFA. So I hope you have your coffees at the ready. I hope you have your phones on silent and you're ready to think about yourselves over the next 20 minutes. So as always, this is an informal session and we are live, so we would love you to interact throughout. So what you should be able to see to the right of your screen is a chat box. So if you can't see it, it might be minimized, have a hunt around for it. So I'll be asking you to input at different times throughout the session. So be prepared to put your coffee down, type your thoughts in there and any ideas you have as well. So do bear in mind that there is a 30-second delay and we are recording this session, but if we do ask your question or read your comment, we won't refer to you by name. So today I have our guest speaker, Jo Goodwin, to discuss some issues over a coffee. So Jo is Head of Marketing for Feed Info and AgriMoney at AgriBriefing, and she's with us to offer her thoughts and advice on how to get noticed in your job. So it's great to have you here today, Jo. Before we get to the crux of the issue, can you start by just telling us a bit about yourself and share with us a bit about your career history as well?
Sure. Hi. Thanks for that, Ollie, and thanks for having me. So yeah, as you mentioned, I work at AgriBriefing, heading up the marketing team for some of our subscription and community products, which actually also includes WFA as well. And yeah, so my career has been a bit of an interesting one. I started in marketing 12 years ago. Originally in a marketing agency up in Leicester, where I'm from, and spent maybe 6 years or so there working in all sorts of different industries for lots of different clients. So I worked in travel and tourism, I did stuff in the health and safety industry, in healthcare, all sorts of different weird and wonderful clients that we had. And then after a few years, I went sort of in-house, worked for a company that was in the construction industry for about 3 years. And then after that, I moved into the aviation industry. So worked for a publications company, publications and information company that did events, news, and all sorts of things like that, reporting on the aviation industry. So, and then came here about 18 months ago, a little bit longer than that, in 2019. So very familiar with all sorts of different weird and wonderful industries, and particularly industries that have quite a male dominated sort of bent as well. So yeah, it's been an interesting 12 years.
Thanks for that overview, Jo. And the reason that I felt that you'd be particularly well placed to comment on this is, you've worked in a lot of these industries where, it hasn't necessarily been female driven, it has been quite male dominated, but also with your marketing background, I thought who better to talk about selling yourself, getting yourself noticed than an expert marketer. So that's why you're here with me today. So I should say at this point, if you've got a question for Jo or I, or just want to share your thoughts or advice on this topic, please do so in the comments box. You could do so now and throughout the next few minutes as well. So, Jo, my first question to you, I know you've managed teams before. So what do you think line managers look for in their strongest team members, and how should people stand out to their managers and basically impress them, really?
So it's a really interesting one, actually. I've in the last few years, I've sort of taken on a bit of a de facto role with a lot of friends of mine, helping them with their CVs and helping them to sort of, get their next steps, get their next jobs and things like that. And it's something that I really enjoy doing, actually, is helping people do that. And I think it's quite relevant for this question because I sort of say to them, well, when you go into an interview and this is what they're looking for and things. For me personally, I'm looking for someone that knows who they are. They know their strengths, they know what they're good at, they know what they can bring to the table. Be that personality type skills, soft skills, or whether it's skills related to the job that they do. Obviously, in my case, it's marketing. So if I have a particular role out there, I am after someone that really is strong in certain areas, and I want them to know that they are strong in that area. I think that's really key. So know those areas that you're awesome at. Also, for me personally, as a hiring manager, I really like diversity in my teams. And when I'm looking to hire, I like working with people who have different views, opinions, backgrounds to me, actually, different skills even to me, because I know the things that I'm good at. And I know that I want a well-rounded team. And so I try and make sure that the people that I bring on have got various different things that I've already got or that we've perhaps got in the team. So I think really being yourself is such a big thing. And then I think someone that's really open to learn and to grow is really important. So being able to sort of say, here's what I want to go and do next. Here are the ideas that I've got for doing that. And I'd be really interested to see how you in your company can kind of help me with that. I think that really helps you to stand out, because it is a two-way process when you're doing these things. And so asking them, how can you help me with these things, is just as important as being able to demonstrate yourself as well. So I would say those are probably some of the key things. One extra thing that I will add, and this is more when you're in a role rather than looking for your next step. One thing that I really look for is someone who isn't afraid to ask for help when they need it. I think that's really key. And I know I've done it myself in my career in the past, where particularly with workload, if you've got so much on and suddenly you're drowning because you've got all this on and you're putting in extra hours and you're doing everything you can, and it doesn't occur to you perhaps to say, I need some help on this. And I think people that stand out to me are people that say, I'm not going to be able to achieve that without X, Y, Z, whether it's more resource, whether it's more time, whatever it may be. Someone that's not afraid to have that conversation with me, be honest, be open with me, and manage my expectations. I think that really helps someone to stand out, definitely.
No, I think you've got some really good points there. Is I actually know that I have in the past hired people who are like me. And I look back on it now, particularly having done a lot of work with WFA, and I go, I basically hired a really similar person to myself who has not necessarily the same skills, but the same background. It's absolutely crazy. And I know people always talk about that, and actually realizing that I do it a lot is not a good thing. And I'm hopefully going to move away from that moving forward. But yeah, I think you raised a really good point when you said asking for help. When I was thinking about this question as well, I was thinking about asking for help. I think is important, but what is really good when I've managed individuals is the ability to come up with a solution, even if it's the wrong solution. What I really like is if a team member comes to me with a problem and then says, look, I don't really know what to do, but maybe we could try this. Even if it's wrong, even if it's not going to work, it just shows a bit of initiative and that they've actually thought about it. Because I think people often forget that if you have got a work problem, that actually you who are facing the problem is probably best placed to solve the issue, because you probably understand it more than the manager does. So when I see that sort of behavior in people, what it says to me is that they have a real understanding of their role and they're ready for potentially next steps and additional responsibilities. But I completely agree that you should not be afraid to ask for help and advice, because actually suffering in silence is just not going to help anyone, because you're in a team and everyone in the team needs to be able to do what they're doing to make it.
Absolutely. And also, when you're the team leader, it is literally your job to make sure that the people in your team can do their job. So if there's something that they're not able to do for whatever reason, you need to know about it in order to help them do that. And so I think that's why it's, we can be perceptive as managers, and we can look out and spot trends and see where we notice things that we go, okay, maybe this person could do with a bit of help. But there's nothing quite like someone just being able to come up and say, I'm a little bit swamped. Let's see what we can do.
Because I know there's people on my team, and often I'm in this position as well, where you do feel like it's quite overwhelming, and being able to offload it as well as a team member, it helps you as well. So I think it's a nice thing. So actually building on from that, if someone is in their job and they want to get noticed for whatever reason, what would you suggest to them, Jo? What advice would you give them?
I think it really is building on what I've sort of said before. So it's that kind of, so once you know yourself and you demonstrate that, it's continuing to be yourself and it's backing yourself. I think that's a really key one. So, and some of that can be the language, just the way that you talk to your colleagues. So instead of just saying, oh, I've had an idea, maybe we could do this, actually trusting the fact that, no, do you know what? You're in this role, you're the expert in whatever that may be, and changing the language. So instead of maybe we could do, it's I recommend we do. And if you can, even if you can back that up with your experience, I've done X, Y, Z before, And so that's why I'm giving you this recommendation on what we should do. So kind of backing yourself, I think, is a really big one. And I think that gets quite overlooked by a lot of people, especially in the business world where, you know, we're taught to be polite and be friendly and be open and be a good team member. All of those things are brilliant, absolutely. But you do also need to back yourself for sure. So I think that's probably one of the bigger ones that I would say. And also be yourself as well, you know, in terms of your personality, in terms of your authenticity. What makes you you in the real world out there is exactly the same in work as well. And so, you know, let that shine through with your manager, with your colleagues, if you're a line manager yourself, with your, you know, people in your team. I think that's a really big thing. Don't sort of hide who you are at work. I think on a sort of very practical side, I think another thing that I would say is demonstrating results. So again, it completely depends on what you do and what your role is, what your responsibilities are. But demonstrating, here's what I've done, this is how I did it, here's the results that we've got, etc., can really help you stand out. Because so often in so many different roles, you know that people are doing stuff, but you might not necessarily know exactly what they're doing or how they're doing it or what the impact of that is. And at the end of the day, you're all working for the same business here. You're all working to achieve the same goal. And if you kind of shout out and say, this is my contribution, I think that can really help you stand out as well, without, you know, at every single opportunity shouting out how amazing you are. I think that's a really big way of sort of helping yourself stand out. And then finally, the other thing that I would say, and again, this actually comes from when I was client side. So when I was working at a marketing agency, one of the biggest things is managing expectations. So before you embark on something, just spend a few, if, you know, perhaps if someone asks you, oh, could you take on this new project? Would you mind doing this? Whatever it may be. Take a beat, think about it for a second. Think, what else have you got on? What are your timescales looking like at the moment? What other responsibilities have you got? Can you take this thing on right now? And manage those expectations. So even if that's, do you know what? Really great idea. Love it. I'd love to be able to help. Let me get back to you once I've just had a quick look at everything else I've got on. And then you can come back to them later and say, sure, I can help. I'll give you 2 weeks or whatever it may be. Managing those expectations from the beginning, I think, is really key. So yeah, I think those are probably the main things I would say.
Yeah, I think there's some really good ones in there. I think one that particularly rings true with me, given our audience, is the confidence side of things. So I remember we ran a session in January, and one of the contributors to this workshop was saying, I'm in a similar role and I'm running a project with a man, and he's just always so always telling everyone what we're doing, and he's so confident, and I feel a bit weird about doing that. And I think as women, a lot of us are a little bit less inclined to talk about all the amazing things that we're doing, and also go in and have that conviction to say, this is what we're doing, this is my idea. So actually, that's something I think all of us need to be thinking about. Change your language. Actually make your manager realize that you are the best person to do this, because you've got the confidence in your own ability, because you probably can do it. And if a lot of men are doing it, then you certainly can as well. Now, of course, there are some women who are excellent at doing this and some men who are terrible at doing this. So it does cross all genders as well, but just something to bear in mind. Now, before I offer my opinion on this question, I do want to say, tell us in the chat box what you think. So what would you suggest to someone who wants to get noticed in their job? I think for me, when I was thinking about this, I was considering, I suppose, I think it's very, if you're doing a good job and you're easy to manage, then you can fly under the radar, because as a manager, you give the most support to those who need it. And, you know, those who shout the loudest are often those who get the attention. And if you're good at your job, you might just be kind of left to your own devices. So I think the best thing to do is to actually be honest with the management, with people managing you, and basically, you know, explain to them, well, think about yourself first and think about why you want to be noticed in your job. You know, is it that you want praise because you're working effectively? Do you want more money? Do you want a promotion, additional responsibilities? And then communicate that to your manager, because they're not mind readers, and hopefully they can help you put together a plan to achieve what you want to do. This is important because, you know, if you can get your manager to sign up to your plan of action and say, you know, if I do all these things in this amount of time, can I get where I want to be? then you're laughing. You just got to do what you said on the list and then you're good to go. I know we spoke earlier about workloads, and I think volunteering for additional responsibilities is good as long as you can cope with your current workload. That's
Definitely.
quite an important one. But I would say that, as you mentioned earlier, if I'm asked to work on an additional project, I made a commitment to myself many years ago never to say no. Now, often that means that you have to say, okay, well, I'll do it, but you've got to take this work off me. But I think exposure to new things and new experiences and knowledge of working on new projects in new kind of areas, I think is invaluable and really helps to get you noticed. So that's something else I was thinking about. But don't take on too much additional work, because if you can't cope, that's actually going to go the other way, as we discussed earlier. So I'm going to ask you another question now, Jo. What about those who are doing a good job? Their manager is really happy with them, but they want to be recognised by those outside their teams. So other teams, those higher up in businesses who they aren't directly working with. What would you recommend to them?
So I think there's three things that I would say here, and conveniently they all begin with the letter C. I think the first one is communicate. Communication is really key. So it's about sharing, as I was saying before, actually sharing what you're working on, sharing what you're doing, sharing the results of it. But also, more than that, communication is so much about know your audience. And, I've worked in places where some of the senior stakeholders, all they want is the headlines. They just literally want boom, boom, boom. Give me the bullet points of what I need to know, and that's it. And I've worked with other people that want to dig into every single little statistic, every little figure, every little paragraph of whatever it is that you send them, whether it's a report, whether it's a presentation, or even just a meeting. So I think knowing your audience is a really big one in knowing how best to communicate to them. This is something that I learned in my last role, actually, when I was on aviation side, and I worked with so many different teams, in editorial, in a product side, tech and sales, and all sorts of different teams. And each person that I dealt with had a slightly different way that they liked to work. And so for me, it was about learning how best to communicate to help them know what they need to know from me, but also means that I got the best out of them as well. So I knew, for example, oh, well, Mark over in this side of the business, if you send him a PowerPoint with lots of pretty pictures explaining it really easily, golden. But I know that Justine really likes a spreadsheet. So maybe for her, I need to send her some slightly different data. So I think that communication piece is really key. Not just telling people, but telling them in the right way. And that's a really key way to, I think, get yourself noticed outside of your immediate team and manager. The next one is consistency. And I think that that's, exactly as you said, you're doing a good job already. Great, keep it up. Continue being great at all of those things that you're doing. Continue being someone that the business can rely on. I think that's really important, because apart from anything, when you go on leave, when you go on holiday, or if you're off sick suddenly, they notice when you're not there. And I think that's really, although you don't want that to be the case, you want the business to still be very much supported, but that's certainly a way to make sure that you get noticed, is to remain consistent, for sure. And then the last one, I think, is arguably the most obvious, is collaborate. So kind of like you were saying before, Ollie, about, I've got ideas. I think there's some cool stuff we could do. Maybe I should team up with so-and-so who's working in that department, and we can go and do something cool together. Hey, I've got an idea. How about we work on this and see what we could do with it? I think that's really key, because people like to have their voices heard. And, a really big example of that actually was when I was in the construction industry. So I worked at this company that had something like 19 different divisions, and they all did completely different things. So some of them were doing things like fire safety. Some of them were doing things like training on construction sites for environmental stuff, all sorts of different things. And I was responsible for trying to bring them all together to come behind the marketing and sales strategy that we were putting in place for the year. And I did that by bringing them all into the same room. We did a little workshop, and I said, okay, guys. And I listed out a few clients that I'd done my homework before. I knew that people in that team, that team, that team, and that team all worked with this same company, but they didn't even know each other. And this is only a business with 600 staff. I mean, that's relatively large, but it was all based on the same site in Watford, actually, just north of London. And yet they didn't know each other, despite working with the same company for years in some instances. So I brought these people together. So it wasn't necessarily just about me collaborating with them. It was also about me helping them collaborate with each other and being that facilitator for that. So I think collaboration is a really key one of being able to get noticed. And it meant that, you know, if I went to the canteen at Thursday at 10:30 and I went and grabbed a coffee or a slice of cake, I would know someone in there because I'd worked with all these different areas on all these different things, and helped them to connect with each other as well. Yeah.
There we go. The 3 C's, everyone. Check them out. Because I do think this is a really tricky one. You know, I really struggle with this. You know, you see people in your companies who are just really charming with senior management and with other teams and selling themselves. And I'm just not very good at it. So I think, you know, if you can think of ways to do that and get practical ideas, let me know. I do think it's good to try and get your manager on board to help them do a bit of cheerleading for you as well. I think that's quite nice.
Oh, I like it.
Because then they can do the work for you. It's wonderful. So there is one more question, because we are already almost out of time, but so a brief answer on this one, Jo. What about someone who wants to move into a more senior role? You know, what should they be doing to start to impress? I know we've touched on lots of things that are relevant, but is there anything else that you think people can do to make them be seen as the ideal candidate to progress?
I think it's you hinted on it earlier, actually, when you were saying about know what it is that you want to do. Have a clear idea of what do you want that next step to be. Once you know what that is, communicate that to the right people. And the right people is normally going to be your manager. It might be someone in HR, maybe a friendly director or someone else that's senior that you might want to work with going forwards. But making it known that that's what you want to achieve. And then I think the next part is asking them, how can I do that? How can I upskill? What do you think I need to do to get there? What are the sort of key 3 or 4 things that I need to demonstrate to you over the next 6 months or the next 12 months to actually help me be ready for that? And again, as I said before in the very first answer, asking them, how can you help me do that as well? Because depending on where you are in your career and things like that, it's exactly the same as when you first join a new company. Your manager is also there to help you as well, and it's just as much about how can they help you. They are your employer, so how can they help you achieve what it is that you want to achieve? And I think coming to them with ideas yourself, with, oh look, here's some ways that we might be able to get me to where I want to go, that makes a really big impact, in my opinion. I've experienced it myself when people have come to me and they've said, Jo, you know, I want to manage people. And I said, okay, well, let's have a look at the skills that you need in order to do that. Where do you feel that your, you know, strengths are with that at the moment? And how can I help you build on that so that when we are able to grow, we can try and get you some of that skill in your role? So I think that's so key, is just having that conversation with your manager and understanding what you can bring to this role. But also where those gaps are that you're going to need to fill over the next however many months until that opportunity becomes available. Definitely.
I agree. I always find that sort of behavior really impressive. I always think, wow, like they're ready for this just by asking the questions directly. Because I'm one of those people who maybe I'm not always confident enough to ask for those things. So when I see members of my team do it, I think it's fantastic. I'm always really up for understanding what they need from me and where we can get them to where they want to go. Definitely. Now, we've actually had a few questions and comments come in, which is lovely. So I'm going to go through them now. So we have a bit of a tip here. So in email communication, do not spam everyone, but if you can strategically CC those in that should be aware that it's your work, then that's quite helpful. I think that's a really good point. I've had a particular colleague in the past who used to always copy in the most senior people every time he did something good. Actually, I don't think I'd ever kind of necessarily have the confidence to do that. And that's really impressive. And it works. So absolutely, I think that's a really good one. Here we go. This is a comment about self-belief. So it says here, for so many women, the problem is with self-belief. And this can then result in tendency to fall into a trap of constantly striving for perfection to prove credibility, etc. This creates a negative cycle, because in striving for perfection, it can be easy to miss opportunities. So it's about having the confidence to get out from behind your desk and build your network. What do you think about that, Jo? Any comments?
I completely agree with that for sure. And it's something that, I learned myself actually a few years ago. My boss at the time, my director, he said to me, Jo, you do realize that you ask for validation all the time. You're always saying, oh, what do you think? Is this the right approach? And he said, it's the right approach. You've got X many years behind you. You've got, whatever qualifications it is that you've got. I've seen you do it in the 2 years that you've been here. You don't need to ask if you've got the right approach to it. Just believe in yourself, have confidence, because I've got confidence in you and the team has confidence in you. So I think that's a really, really valid point. Absolutely.
Yeah, it comes up so much, that one. And I think, yeah, it's a really good point. I think we should all get out from our desks, behind our desks, and build our networks. And WFA can help with that. So do get involved with as much of our work as possible. And we have a question for you, Jo. So what is your advice for getting recognition when you are unofficially working as an interim for a vacant position plus your current position? So this person, this person's asking advice on if you're working in kind of an interim role, I suppose, as well as your current role. How do you get that recognition and the credit for that? What do you think?
I think it comes back to what I was saying before about demonstrating and communicating. It's about, whatever it is that you're working on, whatever projects that you're involved in, or whatever it may be, going back and saying, here's what I've delivered and here's the results, I think is a really big thing. So here's the impact of the work that I have done. It saved us this much time, this much money. It's meant that we could do these other things that we couldn't do before. Whatever it may be, that's the good impacts of the work that you have done, share that. And I think that can really help you, that can really help you moving into that space. And I think being open, being that communication piece, backing yourself again, and then also being really upfront and honest and saying, actually, I really want this, and saying, how can you help me get there? So I think it's all of those things combined.
And I think if you're working basically your own job and you're kind of contributing to an interim role, that's so impressive. You're doing what you were doing before and something else, if I've understood the situation correctly. So you need to, what we were talking about, the self-belief, I think, tell everyone that you're doing it. Use the CC idea, copy people into emails are really important, because that is something that I think, when I hear people are basically working their role and kind of contributing to another role, that makes me think they're ready for kind of big things. They're getting awareness of other parts of a company, and also they're getting an understanding of kind of what it would be like to potentially be juggling lots of balls if they're in a senior management position as well. So I think that's a really good one. I'm going to round it up there because we've already run over, as always. So thank you to the wonderful Jo Goodwin, for being so insightful today and giving us some inspiration. As usual, I barely touched my coffee because it was such a great discussion. So thank you so much, Jo. Thank you to everyone who tuned into the session today. We hope you found it interesting and insightful, and we'll be having another coffee break discussion next month. Do join if you can. And we do have our next WFA session in 2 weeks, which is a WFA Views session. It's a fireside chat with Tatiana Fadiva, who is the CEO of Agco Machinery. So she is a young woman in a male-dominated industry leading a division. She's so inspirational and fantastic. You've got to come check out the chat. It's going to be on Thursday, the 17th of June at 3 p.m. UK time. So we hope to see you all there. So thank you for joining today, everyone, and we hope you have a good day.